When my daughter handed me a single threadbare blanket and pointed toward the attic stairs on Christmas Eve, saying, "Mom, you'll understand when you're older that family comes first," I almost told her about the lottery ticket burning a hole in my coat pocket. Almost. What she didn't know was that I'd been carrying around a winning ticket worth $12 million for 3 weeks, and tomorrow morning, everything was going to change. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Blanche Flores, and at 67 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of disappointment a person could experience. I was wrong. Standing at the bottom of those creaky attic stairs in my daughter's house, clutching my overnight bag and listening to her husband's booming laugh echoing from the living room below, I realized there were still new depths of humiliation waiting to be discovered. 3 months earlier, I'd been living comfortably in my small apartment across town, tending to my garden and volunteering at the literacy center twice a week. My husband Roberto had passed 4 years ago, leaving me with enough savings to maintain my independence and dignity. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't struggling either. I had my routines, my book club, my Wednesday coffee dates with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Life was quiet but peaceful. Then came the diagnosis. Dr. Martinez had delivered the news about my heart condition, with the kind of clinical detachment that made serious things sound manageable. Arrhythmia, he'd called it. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to require monitoring and medication. More importantly, it was enough to make my daughter Patricia panic and insist I couldn't live alone anymore. Patricia had swooped in like a hurricane of concern and practicality. She'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon in my apartment, making lists and taking photos of my belongings, talking about assisted living facilities and the importance of family support systems. When I'd protested that I felt fine and wanted to stay in my own home, she'd given me that look, the one that said I was being unreasonable and stubborn. "Mom, you fainted at the grocery store," she'd said, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for explaining obvious things to children. "What if it happens again when you're alone? What if you fall and can't get up? We can't take that risk." I'd wanted to point out that I'd only fainted because I'd skipped breakfast and stood up too quickly. But Patricia was already in full organizational mode. Within 2 weeks, she'd arranged for my apartment to be packed up and most of my belongings to be stored in a facility across town. The items she deemed essential would come with me to her house, where I could stay in the guest room until we found a more permanent solution. The guest room, as it turned out, was needed for other purposes by the time I actually moved in. Patricia's husband, Derek, had decided to convert it into a home office for his expanding consulting business. Their son, Marcus, who was 22 and supposedly job hunting, had claimed the basement for his gaming setup and late-night activities. This left the attic as the only available space for me. Patricia had presented this arrangement as temporary, a minor inconvenience while Derek finished setting up his office. The attic had been cleaned out, she assured me, and they'd installed a small window unit for heating and cooling. "It would be cozy," she said, "like having my own private retreat away from the family chaos." What she hadn't mentioned was that the attic ceiling sloped so dramatically that I could only stand upright in the center of the room. She'd neglected to explain that the single window was painted shut and hadn't been opened in years. She'd forgotten to mention that every footstep in the house below would echo up through the floorboards, making sleep nearly impossible when Marcus came home from his evening activities. The first night, I'd lain on the narrow cot Patricia had provided, staring at the water stains on the ceiling and trying to convince myself this was just a temporary adjustment. I'd raised 3 children, managed a household through good times and bad, and helped Roberto build his small landscaping business from nothing. I was resilient. I could adapt. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched toward months, I began to understand that temporary had become permanent in everyone's mind but mine. Patricia had settled into a routine that didn't include consulting me about the future. Derek had spread his business materials across what used to be my intended space. Marcus had made it clear through his indifference that my presence in the house was neither noticed nor appreciated. The lottery ticket had entered my life on a Tuesday morning in November. I'd been walking to the corner store to pick up milk and had stopped at the small newsstand where Mr. Alvarez always greeted me with a smile and asked about my day. On impulse, something I rarely allowed myself, I'd bought a single ticket for the evening drawing. $5 seemed like a small price for a few hours of daydreaming about what I might do with unexpected wealth. I'd chosen my numbers carefully, not randomly. Roberto's birthday, the anniversary of our first date, the day each of our children was born. Numbers that meant something, that carried the weight of memories and love. I'd tucked the ticket into my coat pocket and promptly forgotten about it until 3 days later when I'd heard the winning numbers announced on the radio while I was sorting through a box of old photographs. The shock had been immediate and overwhelming. I'd pulled out the ticket with trembling hands, checking and rechecking the numbers until there was no doubt left. $12 million. After taxes, still more money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to buy a beautiful house, to travel, to help my children and grandchildren in ways I'd never been able to before. My first instinct had been to run downstairs and share the news with Patricia and Derek. But something had stopped me at the top of the attic stairs. Maybe it was the sound of Derek's voice drifting up from his office, irritated and impatient as he dealt with some client crisis. Maybe it was the memory of Patricia's dismissive tone when I'd suggested I might want to move back to my own apartment soon. Instead, I'd sat back down on my cot and thought about what this ticket represented. Freedom. Independence. The ability to make my own choices about where I lived and how I spent my remaining years. But also, for the first time in months, leverage. The power to see how my family really felt about me when they thought I had nothing left to offer. I'd called the lottery office the next day and spoken to a claims specialist who'd explained the process for claiming large prizes. There was no rush, she'd assured me. I had 6 months to claim the winnings, and there were advantages to waiting, to planning carefully for the tax implications, and the best ways to structure the payout. That conversation had planted the seed of an idea. What if I waited? What if I kept this secret? And used the time to observe, to really understand where I stood in my own family. What if I discovered whether their concern for my well-being was genuine, or simply obligation wrapped in guilt? The days following that decision had been revelatory in the most painful way. With my lottery secret tucked safely away, I'd begun to notice things I'd previously excused or overlooked. The way Patricia sighed when I asked simple questions about household routines. The way Derek's jaw tightened when I emerged from the attic during his important phone calls. The way Marcus looked through me as if I were furniture that happened to be temporarily occupying space in his path. I'd started keeping a small notebook, not out of any sense of vindictiveness, but because I needed to record these observations to convince myself they were real. The morning Patricia had snapped at me for using too much hot water. The evening Derek had asked if I could eat dinner earlier because my presence in the dining room made his business calls awkward. The countless times Marcus had turned up his gaming volume when I was trying to read, then acted surprised when I asked him to lower it. These weren't catastrophic moments of cruelty, but they were death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each small dismissal, each casual disregard, each assumption that my needs were less important than their convenience, had accumulated into a weight I carried in my chest. The weeks leading up to Christmas had been particularly challenging. Patricia had thrown herself into holiday preparations with the enthusiasm of someone trying to create the perfect family gathering. She'd decorated the house beautifully, planned elaborate meals, and invited extended family members for Christmas Eve dinner. In all of these preparations, I'd been treated less like a participating family member and more like a logistical challenge to be managed. When I'd offered to help with the cooking, Patricia had politely declined, saying she had everything under control. When I'd suggested contributing money for gifts or groceries, she'd waved me off with a comment about not wanting me to worry about expenses. When I'd asked about sleeping arrangements for the visiting relatives, she'd assured me that the attic would be fine for me, that I was comfortable there by now. The visiting relatives were Derek's parents, who lived in Florida and made the trip north twice a year. They were pleasant people, but they'd never shown much interest in me beyond polite inquiries about my health. Derek's brother and his wife were coming too, along with their twin daughters who were in high school. These were the people who would be occupying the guest rooms and the sofa bed in the living room. I'd understood the practical considerations, but I'd also understood the message. When space was limited and choices had to be made, I was the one who could be accommodated in the least desirable location. I was the one whose comfort could be compromised for everyone else's convenience. The morning of Christmas Eve, I'd woken before dawn to the sound of Patricia bustling around the kitchen below. I dressed quietly and made my way downstairs, hoping to help with the breakfast preparations or at least share a quiet cup of coffee before the chaos of the day began. Patricia had been standing at the stove, still in her robe, flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. She'd glanced up when I entered, her expression cycling through surprise, mild irritation, and resignation. "You're up early," she'd said, her tone neutral but not welcoming. "I thought I might help," I'd replied, moving toward the coffee maker. "I've got it handled," she'd said quickly. "Besides, Derek's parents will be down soon, and you know how his mother likes her coffee prepared a certain way." I'd stopped moving, my hand halfway to the coffee filters. I could learn how she likes it. Patricia had paused in her pancake flipping, her shoulders tense. "Mom, please, I just need to get through today without any complications. Can you maybe stay upstairs until after breakfast? I'll bring you a plate." The word complications had hit me like a physical blow. That's what I'd become in my daughter's house. Not a helpful family member, not a beloved grandmother, but a complication to be managed and contained. I'd retreated to the attic without argument, but something had shifted inside me. I'd pulled out the lottery ticket and stared at it, running my fingers over the numbers that represented my secret freedom. Today, I'd decided. Today I would see exactly where I stood in this family's hierarchy of importance. The morning had passed slowly. I'd heard the arrival of Derek's family, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting up through the floorboards. I'd heard Patricia's voice, bright and welcoming, as she greeted each guest and showed them to their rooms. I'd heard the children's excited chatter about Christmas morning and the elaborate breakfast being prepared in their honor. At noon, Patricia had appeared at the top of the attic stairs with a plate of food that had clearly been assembled from leftovers. The pancakes were cold, the fruit slightly wilted, the coffee lukewarm. She'd set the plate down on my small table with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry it took so long," she'd said. Everyone was hungry after their travel. I'd thanked her and eaten the food without complaint, but I'd also made a mental note. When space was limited and food had to be distributed, I was the one who could wait. I was the one who could make do with what was left over. The afternoon had been a symphony of family activities happening without me. I'd heard board games being played, movies being watched, cookies being baked. When I'd ventured downstairs to use the bathroom, I'd found Derek's nieces sprawled across the living room floor, working on a puzzle while the adults sat around discussing vacation plans and work promotions. No one had invited me to join. No one had asked if I wanted to watch the movie or help with the cookies. I'd been polite when spoken to, but I'd been treated as a peripheral figure, someone who existed in the house but not really in the family. As evening approached and the Christmas Eve dinner preparations began in earnest, I'd stayed in the attic, listening to the sounds of celebration below. I'd heard Patricia directing the meal preparations with military precision, Derek opening wine and making toasts, the children's laughter echoing through the house. At 7 o'clock, Marcus had appeared at the top of the attic stairs, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. "Dinner's ready," he'd said. "Mom says to come down." I'd followed him downstairs to find the dining room transformed. The table was set with Patricia's best china, candles flickered in silver holders, and the meal looked like something from a magazine. Everyone was already seated. Glasses filled with wine or sparkling cider, faces glowing with holiday warmth. The only empty chair was at the far end of the table, squeezed between Marcus and the wall. I'd taken my place and tried to participate in the conversation, but it had been clear that I was an afterthought, someone who'd been included out of obligation rather than genuine desire for my company. The meal had been delicious, and I'd complimented Patricia on her cooking. The conversation had flowed around me, touching on topics I knew little about or memories I hadn't shared. I'd smiled and nodded and tried to contribute when possible, but mostly I'd observed. I'd watched Derek's mother hold court at the other end of the table, telling stories about their Florida community and their recent cruise.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I'd watched the teenagers scroll through their phones between courses. occasionally showing each other pictures or videos. I'd watched Patricia beam with pride as her in-laws praised her hosting skills and her beautiful home. And I'd watched Derek, who'd grown more expansive and generous with each glass of wine, making pronouncements about family values and the importance of taking care of the people you love. The irony hadn't been lost on me as I'd sat in my squeezed corner, eating from plates that had been chosen without my input, listening to conversations that proceeded without my participation. After dinner, as the adults had settled in the living room with coffee and dessert, I'd offered to help with the dishes. Patricia had accepted this offer, perhaps because cleaning up after such an elaborate meal was genuinely overwhelming, or perhaps because it gave her a way to keep me occupied while the rest of the family enjoyed their post-dinner socializing. We'd worked in relative silence, me washing and her drying, the sounds of laughter and conversation floating in from the living room. I'd been about to comment on what a lovely evening it had been when Patricia had spoken first. "I'm glad you're here for this," she'd said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been affection. "I know it's not easy, adjusting to living here." I'd looked at her, hope flickering in my chest. "It's an adjustment, but I'm grateful for your care." She'd nodded, drawing a wine glass with careful attention. "I worry about you sometimes, about what will happen as you get older, as your health gets more complicated." The hope had begun to fade. "I'm managing well so far." "For now," she'd said. "But we need to be realistic. The attic isn't a long-term solution. We need to start looking at assisted living facilities again, places where you can get proper care." I'd stopped washing dishes, my hands still in the soapy water. "I don't need assisted living. I need my own space, my own life." Patricia had sighed, the sound carrying frustration and something that might have been pity. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore. We've been through this. I could get my own apartment again. I could hire help if I needed it." "With what money?" The question had been asked gently, but it had landed like a slap. "You're on a fixed income. You can't afford an apartment and care. That's why you're here." I'd stood there, my hands dripping soap bubbles onto the floor, understanding finally and completely how she saw me. Not as a capable woman who temporarily needed help, but as a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved with the least possible disruption to her own life. "I see," I'd said quietly. "I'm not trying to be harsh," she'd continued. "I'm trying to be practical. We all have to face reality as we age." I'd finished the dishes in silence, my mind racing through possibilities and plans. The lottery ticket in my coat pocket had felt like it was burning, demanding acknowledgement. But I'd held my tongue, filed away this conversation with all the others, and prepared myself for what I'd suspected would be the final test of my family's regard. As the evening had wound down and the out-of-town guests had prepared for bed, I'd found myself once again climbing the attic stairs, but this time I hadn't been alone. Patricia had followed me up, carrying a thin blanket and wearing an expression that managed to be both apologetic and determined. "I'm sorry about this," she'd said, standing in the low-ceilinged space that had become my world. "But Derek's parents are older, and the altitude change affects his mother's breathing. They really need to be on the main floor tonight." I'd looked at the blanket in her hands, understanding that my usual cot had been given to someone else. "Where am I sleeping?" "There's an air mattress in the corner. I know it's not ideal, but it's just for tonight. Tomorrow, after everyone leaves, you can have your regular space back." I'd stared at her, my daughter, the child I'd carried and nursed and raised, who was now explaining why I would be sleeping on the floor of an attic on Christmas Eve. Not because there was no other option, but because other people's comfort had been prioritized over mine. "Patricia," I'd said slowly, "do you hear yourself right now?" She'd looked confused, maybe even a little defensive. "I'm doing the best I can with the space we have. You're asking your mother to sleep on the floor so that virtual strangers can be more comfortable. They're not strangers, they're Derek's parents. And you'll understand when you're older that family comes first." That phrase had hung in the air between us like a challenge. Family comes first. As if I wasn't family. As if my comfort, my dignity, my basic human needs were secondary to maintaining good relationships with people who saw me maybe twice a year. I'd taken the blanket from her hands and watched her retreat down the stairs. her footsteps quickly swallowed by the sounds of continued conversation below. I'd stood there in the dim attic light, surrounded by boxes of my own belongings that I wasn't allowed to fully unpack, holding a single threadbare blanket and facing the reality of spending Christmas Eve on an air mattress on the floor. And that's when I'd almost told her about the lottery ticket. Almost pulled it out of my pocket and announced that I had $12 million, that I could buy my own house, that I could afford any kind of care I might ever need, that I didn't have to accept this treatment because I had options she couldn't imagine. But I hadn't. Because I'd needed to see this moment, to experience it fully, to understand beyond any doubt what my place in this family really was. I'd needed to know that when choices had to be made, when someone's comfort had to be sacrificed, it would always be mine. I'd needed to confirm that I was seen not as a cherished family member, but as an obligation to be managed with the minimum possible disruption to everyone else's life. As I'd spread the thin blanket over the air mattress and changed into my nightgown, I'd listened to the sounds of Christmas Eve celebration continuing below. I'd heard Derek's booming laugh, Patricia's animated conversation, the children's excitement about the morning to come. I'd heard the family I'd helped create, the people I'd loved and sacrificed for, enjoying their holiday without a thought for the woman sleeping on the floor above them. And I'd pulled out the lottery ticket one more time, staring at the numbers that represented my secret freedom, and I'd smiled. Because tomorrow was Christmas morning, and I had a gift to give my family that they would never forget. Tomorrow, they would learn what it meant to take family for granted. Tomorrow, they would discover that the poor, helpless woman they'd been managing was actually the one holding all the cards. I'd folded the ticket carefully and put it back in my coat pocket, then settled down on the air mattress to wait for dawn. Sleep had been impossible, but I hadn't minded. I'd had too much to think about, too many plans to make. The long night had given me time to consider exactly how I wanted to handle the revelation of my lottery win, how I wanted to frame the choices I would be making about my future. As the house had finally quieted and the sounds of celebration had given way to the peaceful silence of Christmas Eve night, I'd lain there on the floor of the attic, warmer than I'd been in months despite the thin blanket and the cold air. Because for the first time since I'd moved into this house, I'd felt truly powerful. Not because I had money, but because I had knowledge. Knowledge about who my family really was, and knowledge about who I was going to become. The lottery ticket was just paper and ink, but it represented something much more valuable than money. It represented the opportunity to reclaim my dignity, to make my own choices, to live the rest of my life on my own terms. It represented the chance to show my family that their assumptions about me were not just wrong, but catastrophically so. And as Christmas morning had approached, as the first pale light of dawn had begun to filter through the single attic window, I'd realized that this was going to be the most important Christmas of my life. Not because of the money I was about to claim, but because of the woman I was about to become. The woman who would never again sleep on someone else's floor, never again accept being treated as a burden, never again allow her love to be taken for granted. I was Blanche Flores, and I was about to give my family a Christmas morning they would remember for the rest of their lives. Christmas morning arrived with the sound of Derek's parents arguing about the thermostat settings and the children's excited voices carrying up through the floorboards. I had been awake for hours, lying on the air mattress and watching the pale winter light gradually fill the attic space. My back ached from the unforgiving surface, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. Today was the day I would stop pretending to be helpless. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy blue dress I'd worn to Roberto's funeral, the one that made me feel dignified and serious. I pinned my silver hair back neatly and applied lipstick with a steady hand. When I looked in the small mirror Patricia had provided, I saw not the broken-down woman my family expected, but someone who was about to reclaim her power. The house below was already buzzing with Christmas morning energy. I could hear Patricia orchestrating the gift exchange, Derek making coffee for his parents, Marcus grumbling about being woken up too early. I waited until the sounds settled into a rhythm before making my way downstairs, the lottery ticket secure in my dress pocket. The living room was a chaos of wrapping paper and excited voices. Derek's nieces were comparing their new phones while his parents sat on the sofa, Patricia's best coffee cups balanced on their knees. Patricia was kneeling beside the tree, sorting through packages with the focused determination of a general organizing supplies. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said as I entered the room. The responses were polite but distracted. Derek glanced up from his newspaper and nodded. His mother smiled vaguely in my direction before returning to her conversation about Florida weather patterns. The teenagers didn't acknowledge me at all. Patricia looked up from the gift pile, her expression cycling through surprise and mild irritation. "Mom, I was going to bring your breakfast up. You didn't need to come down yet." "I wanted to be part of Christmas morning," I said, settling into the single remaining chair, a hard wooden seat near the window. "Of course," Patricia said, though her tone suggested this was an unexpected complication in her carefully planned morning. "Your gifts are right here." She handed me 2 packages, both wrapped in paper that was obviously left over from other gifts. I opened them carefully while conversation continued around me. A generic calendar featuring landscapes of nowhere in particular. A bottle of hand lotion from the drugstore, the kind that came in gift sets for people you didn't know well enough to shop for properly. I thanked her genuinely, because I understood these gifts for what they were. Afterthoughts. Obligations fulfilled with minimal effort or expense. Evidence of how thoroughly I had become a peripheral figure in my own family. The morning continued with elaborate gift exchanges between the real family members. Derek's parents had brought expensive electronics for the grandchildren. Patricia and Derek exchanged jewelry and weekend getaway plans. Marcus received a new gaming setup that cost more than I had spent on groceries in 3 months. I watched it all with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. These people shared my blood, my history, my love, but they had created a family unit that operated without me. I was present but not participating, acknowledged but not included. Around 10 o'clock, after the gift exchange had concluded and people had begun to scatter for showers and breakfast preparations, I announced that I needed to step outside for some fresh air. Patricia barely looked up from collecting wrapping paper, but she reminded me to take my heart medication and not to stay out too long in the cold. I walked 3 blocks to the corner store where Mr. Alvarez had sold me the winning ticket. The streets were quiet, most families inside enjoying their Christmas mornings. The cold air felt sharp and clean in my lungs, washing away the stale atmosphere of being tolerated rather than welcomed. Mr. Alvarez was working despite the holiday, and his face brightened when he saw me approaching. "Mrs. Flores, Merry Christmas. How are you celebrating today?" "I'm about to change my life," I told him, and he laughed, thinking I was making a holiday joke. I used the store's phone to call the lottery office's 24-hour claim line. Even on Christmas morning, there was someone available to help winners begin the process of claiming their prizes. The woman who answered sounded cheerful and professional, and she walked me through the initial steps with practiced efficiency. "Congratulations, Mrs. Flores," she said after verifying my ticket numbers. $12 million is a life-changing amount. Do you have legal representation? I told her I would be securing an attorney immediately, and she provided me with a list of law firms that specialized in lottery winners. She also scheduled an appointment for me the following week to begin the formal claim process and discuss the various payout options available. "Many people in your situation choose the annuity option," she explained. "It provides guaranteed income for 30 years and offers some protection against overspending." "I'll be taking the lump sum," I said without hesitation. "I'm 67 years old. I don't have 30 years to wait for my own money." After taxes, the lump sum would be approximately $7 million. More money than I could spend in my remaining lifetime, even if I lived extravagantly. Enough to buy a beautiful house, to travel, to be generous with people who deserved it, and to ensure my independence for whatever years I had left. But first, I needed to have a conversation with my family. I walked back to Patricia's house slowly, using the time to rehearse what I would say and how I would say it. I wasn't planning to be cruel, but I was planning to be clear. They needed to understand that their assumptions about me were wrong, and they needed to face the consequences of how they had chosen to treat me. The house was in full Christmas morning mode when I returned. Derek's parents were settled in the living room with their coffee and newspapers, the teenagers were absorbed in their new devices, and Patricia was in the kitchen preparing what she called Christmas brunch, an elaborate meal that would take hours to complete. I found Derek in his office, which had been my intended bedroom, surrounded by papers and typing on his laptop despite it being Christmas morning. He glanced up when I appeared in the doorway, his expression suggesting I was interrupting something important. Derek, I need to speak with Patricia and you together. Could you come to the living room when you have a moment? Can it wait? I'm dealing with a client emergency. On Christmas morning? He gestured vaguely at his screen. Business doesn't stop for holidays. Some of us have responsibilities. The implication hung in the air between us. Some of us have responsibilities, unlike others who could afford to wander around making requests for family meetings. I smiled and told him I would wait until he was available. I found Patricia in the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her apron already stained with various ingredients. She was juggling multiple dishes with the frantic energy of someone who had bitten off more than she could chew, but was determined not to admit it. Patricia, when you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you and Derek together. She didn't look up from the stove. Can we talk later? I'm trying to get this meal together, and Derek's parents are expecting brunch by noon. It's important. So is feeding everyone. Can you maybe help instead of talking? I could use someone to set the table. I stood there watching my daughter manage her elaborate meal, realizing that even my requests for conversation were being reframed as interruptions to more important activities. I was being asked to help with tasks but not included in decisions. My presence was useful when labor was needed but inconvenient when attention was required. I'll set the table, I said, and then we'll talk. I spent the next hour helping Patricia complete her Christmas brunch preparations while the rest of the family relaxed or pursued their own interests. I set the table with her good china. I arranged flowers she had purchased in centerpiece vases. I helped coordinate the timing of multiple dishes that needed to finish cooking simultaneously. During this time, I observed the family dynamics with the clarity that comes from knowing you're about to change everything. Derek's parents offered occasional compliments on the meal's progress, but no actual assistance. The teenagers emerged from their rooms only to ask when food would be ready. Marcus wandered through the kitchen periodically, sampling items and making suggestions, but contributing nothing to the actual work. Derek remained in his office, occasionally calling out questions about meal timing but never offering to help, or even expressing appreciation for the effort being made on behalf of his family's Christmas celebration. As we worked, Patricia kept up a steady stream of conversation about the challenges of hosting holidays, the expense of feeding everyone, the difficulty of coordinating schedules and preferences. She seemed to need to verbalize the stress she was experiencing, but she never paused long enough for me to respond or contribute to the conversation. Derek's mother is so particular about her eggs, she said, whisking something vigorously, and the girls don't eat anything that isn't organic. Marcus wants everything spicy, but Derek's father can't handle any seasoning. I don't know how restaurants manage to please everyone. You're working very hard to make everyone happy, I observed. Someone has to. Derek helps when he can, but his business demands so much attention, and Marcus is going through a difficult time with job hunting. I just want everyone to feel welcome and cared for. I understood then that Patricia saw herself as the family's caretaker, the person responsible for managing everyone's needs and expectations. It was an exhausting role, and I had sympathy for her stress. But I also noticed that in her mental catalog of people whose needs required management, I wasn't included as someone whose happiness mattered. When the meal was finally ready and everyone gathered around the dining room table, Patricia glowed with pride at the elaborate spread she had created. Derek's parents praised her cooking enthusiastically. The teenagers took photos of their plates for social media. Derek complimented her organizational skills and attention to detail. I waited until everyone had been served and the initial excitement about the food had settled before clearing my throat to get attention. I have something important to share with everyone, I said. The conversation didn't stop immediately. Derek's mother continued describing her bridge club's recent tournament. One of the teenagers was showing her sister something on her phone. Derek was already checking his own device for business messages. Excuse me, I said, louder this time. I need everyone's attention for a moment. The table gradually quieted, faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to mild annoyance at the interruption of their Christmas meal. I wanted to let you know that I'll be moving out of the house, I said simply. Patricia looked confused rather than upset. Moving where? We've talked about this, Mom. You can't afford your own place. Actually, I can. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the lottery ticket, placing it carefully on the table beside my plate. I won the lottery 3 weeks ago. $12 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Derek's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Patricia stared at the ticket as if it might be a joke or a prop. Derek's parents exchanged glances that suggested they weren't sure whether to believe what they were hearing. Marcus was the first to speak. No way. You're kidding. I'm not kidding. I've already contacted the lottery office to begin the claim process. Derek set down his fork and leaned forward, his business mind immediately engaged. How much is the actual payout? After taxes? Approximately $7 million if I take the lump sum. $7 million, Patricia repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. I wanted you all to know because I'll be making some changes in my living situation. I'll be buying my own house and returning to independent living. The questions came rapidly then, overlapping and urgent. How long had I known? Why hadn't I told them immediately? Was I certain the ticket was real? Had I consulted with financial advisors? What were my plans for the money? I answered their questions calmly and completely. I explained about checking the numbers, about calling the lottery office, about my upcoming appointment to formally claim the winnings. I described my plans to purchase a house, to hire help if I needed it, to travel and enjoy the independence this money would provide. What I didn't explain was why I had waited 3 weeks to tell them. That revelation could wait until I was ready to address it directly. Derek's parents were the first to recover from their shock, immediately offering congratulations and expressing amazement at my good fortune. They asked intelligent questions about investment strategies and tax implications, treating the situation as an interesting financial development rather than a family crisis. The teenagers quickly became excited about the possibilities, asking if I would buy a mansion, if I would get a sports car, if I would travel to exotic locations. Their enthusiasm was genuine and uncomplicated, focused on the adventure and luxury the money represented. Derek's response was more complex. His initial shock gave way to a kind of analytical excitement as he began to consider the implications. He offered to connect me with financial advisors, to help me research investment options, to provide guidance on managing such a significant windfall. This is incredible, Blanche, he said, using my first name for the first time in months. We need to make sure you're protected from scammers and bad investments. There are people who target lottery winners specifically. Patricia's reaction was the most difficult to read. She seemed genuinely happy about my good fortune, but there was something else in her expression, something that looked like confusion or even worry. Mom, this is wonderful, she said finally. But are you sure you want to live alone? I mean, money doesn't change your health situation. Money changes everything about my health situation, I replied. I can afford the best medical care, home health services if I need them, any accommodation that might become necessary. I can hire people to help me while maintaining my independence and dignity. But we're your family. We want to take care of you. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had spent months treating me like a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved with minimal disruption to their own lives. People who had made me sleep on the floor rather than inconvenience guests they saw twice a year. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I've learned that I prefer to take care of myself. The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical details and future plans. I explained that I would be looking for a house immediately, that I hoped to be moved out within a month, that I was grateful for their care during my transition period, but was ready to return to independent living. As the meal concluded and people began to disperse, Derek pulled me aside for a private conversation. His manner had changed completely from the distracted dismissiveness of earlier in the day. Now he was focused, attentive, treating me like someone whose opinions and decisions mattered. Blanche, I want you to know that you're welcome to stay here as long as you want, he said. There's no rush to move out just because you have money now. That's kind of you, I replied, but I think it's time for me to have my own space again. Are you sure? I mean, we could make some changes. We could convert the basement into a proper apartment for you, give you more privacy and independence while keeping you close to family. I studied his face, seeing genuine concern but also something else. Something that looked like the recognition that a family member with $7 million might be worth treating differently than a family member with only Social Security benefits. Derek, do you remember last night when Patricia explained that I needed to sleep on the air mattress because family comes first? He looked uncomfortable. That was a difficult situation. We were trying to accommodate everyone. You were trying to accommodate everyone except me. I wasn't considered part of the family whose comfort mattered. That's not fair. We care about you. You care about me when it's convenient. When caring requires sacrifice or inconvenience, I become the one whose needs can be overlooked. He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. We stood there in silence for a moment while he processed what I had said and what it might mean for his future relationship with a wealthy family member. I understand you're upset about the sleeping arrangements, he said finally. But that was just one night, one unusual circumstance. It wasn't one night, Derek. It was months of being treated like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. It was being excluded from family activities, ignored in conversations, asked to help with work but not included in decisions. It was being made to feel like my presence was a burden rather than a blessing. We never meant to make you feel that way. Intent doesn't change impact. You may not have meant to marginalize me, but that's exactly what happened. I left him standing in the living room and went upstairs to begin packing my belongings. The attic suddenly felt different, not like a prison I had been confined to, but like a temporary inconvenience I was choosing to leave behind. As I folded my clothes and gathered my personal items, I could hear voices downstairs. Derek and Patricia were having an intense conversation in the kitchen, their voices too low for me to make out words, but the tone unmistakably urgent and concerned. Later, Patricia appeared at the top of the attic stairs, her expression carefully composed but her eyes showing signs of recent tears. "Mom, can we talk?" She sat down on the cot that had been my bed for months, looking around the cramped space as if seeing it clearly for the first time. When her gaze returned to me, there was something new in her expression, something that might have been recognition or even shame. "I had no idea you felt so unwelcome here," she said quietly. "I tried to tell you several times. You were always too busy managing other priorities to listen. I thought I was helping you. I thought you needed taking care of. I needed respect. I needed to be included in decisions about my own life. I needed to be treated like a capable adult who was temporarily dealing with health concerns, not like a child or an invalid." Patricia was quiet for a long time, her hands twisted in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was scared. When Dr. Martinez said you had heart problems, I panicked. I thought if something happened to you while you were living alone, I would never forgive myself. So you decided to make my choices for me. I decided to try to keep you safe. By making me feel unwanted and unwelcome? By treating me like a burden? By putting your in-laws' comfort ahead of your own mother's dignity?" She flinched at the directness of my words, but she didn't argue. We sat there in the dim attic light, surrounded by the boxes of my belongings that I had never been allowed to fully unpack, confronting the reality of how our relationship had deteriorated. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I handled this badly. I was so focused on what I thought you needed that I didn't pay attention to what you actually wanted." "Apologies are a good start," I told her. "But they don't change the fact that I need to live independently. Money doesn't heal hurt feelings, but it does provide options." "Are you angry with us? About the money, I mean. About not telling us right away?" I considered her question carefully. Was I angry? Yes, but not in the way she probably expected. "I'm disappointed," I said finally. "I needed to see how you would treat me when you thought I was powerless and dependent." The answer to that question told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in this family's priorities. "That's not fair. We love you." Love isn't just a feeling, Patricia. It's also action. It's how you treat people when it's inconvenient. It's whether you include them or exclude them. It's whether you listen to their concerns or dismiss them because you think you know better. She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. I felt sympathy for her distress, but I also felt the clarity that comes from finally speaking the truth about a difficult situation. "What can we do to make this right?" she asked. "You can accept that I'm moving out and living independently. You can respect my decisions about my own life. You can include me in family activities because you want me there, not because you feel obligated to invite me. And the money? Are you going to help us? Are you going to share it with the family?" There it was, the question I had been waiting for, the one that revealed what was really driving her distress. Not guilt about how they had treated me, but concern about how my financial independence might affect their own situation. "I'm going to be generous with people who deserve it," I said carefully. "I'm going to help family members who have shown that they value me as a person, not just as a source of potential inheritance." The implication was clear, and Patricia understood it immediately. Her tears stopped, replaced by a look that was part fear and part calculation. "Mom, please don't punish us for one bad night. Don't let Christmas Eve ruin our whole relationship." It wasn't one bad night, Patricia. It was months of being marginalized and dismissed. Christmas Eve was just the final confirmation of where I stand in your priorities. I continued packing while she sat there, processing what I had said and what it might mean for her future. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a note of desperation. "What if we start over? What if we treat this as a fresh beginning and do better going forward?" "I'm willing to rebuild our relationship," I told her. "But it has to be based on mutual respect and genuine inclusion. You can't just flip a switch and pretend the last few months didn't happen. How do we earn your forgiveness? By showing me, consistently and over time, that you see me as a valued family member rather than an obligation to be managed." She nodded, though I could see in her expression that she was struggling to fully understand what I was asking for. The concept of treating me as an equal, rather than a dependent, seemed to require a fundamental shift in her thinking. After she left, I finished packing and sat down to write a list of priorities for my new life. First, I would find and purchase a house that would give me the independence and dignity I had been missing. Second, I would establish the financial and medical support systems that would allow me to age gracefully in my own space. Third, I would rebuild relationships with family members who showed genuine respect for my autonomy and decision-making. As evening approached and the Christmas festivities wound down, I found myself looking forward to leaving this house and starting fresh. The lottery ticket had given me more than money. It had given me the clarity to see my situation honestly and the power to change it completely. Tomorrow I would begin the process of claiming my winnings and reclaiming my life. Tonight, I would sleep on the air mattress one last time, not as a victim of circumstances beyond my control, but as a woman who had chosen to endure temporary discomfort in order to gain permanent insight into the true nature of her family relationships. The voices downstairs had grown quiet, the excitement of Christmas morning giving way to the contemplative mood that often follows major revelations. I knew that Derek and Patricia were probably discussing what my announcement meant for their own lives, their own financial security, their own plans for the future. Let them discuss and calculate and worry. I had done my own calculations, and the numbers were clear. I had the resources to live exactly as I chose, with exactly the people who chose to treat me well. For the first time in months, I felt truly wealthy, and it had nothing to do with money. The days following Christmas passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt surreal after months of stagnation. I had gone from being a peripheral figure in my own family to suddenly becoming the center of everyone's attention. Phone calls started early each morning and continued throughout the day. Patricia checked on me hourly, offering assistance with everything from breakfast to bathroom breaks. Derek appeared with stacks of financial publications and investment advice. Even Marcus emerged from his basement gaming setup to engage in actual conversations about my plans. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that I found myself documenting it in the same small notebook where I had recorded their previous dismissive behavior. Now, instead of noting eye rolls and sighs of irritation, I was writing down offers to help, suggestions for luxury purchases, and invitations to family activities I had been excluded from, just days earlier. On December 27th, I had my first official meeting with the Lottery Commission. Patricia insisted on driving me, despite my protests, that I was perfectly capable of taking myself. She had dressed as if she were attending a business meeting, and she carried a leather portfolio filled with questions she had researched about lottery winnings and tax implications. The lottery office was smaller and more mundane than I had expected, housed in a generic government building with fluorescent lighting and institutional carpeting. The claims specialist, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a pleasant woman in her 50s who walked me through the paperwork with professional efficiency. Mrs. Flores, before we process your claim, I need to verify your identity and ensure you understand all your options, she said, spreading documents across her desk. You have the choice between the annuity option, which would pay you approximately $400,000 annually for 30 years, or the lump sum, which after taxes would be approximately $7.2 million. I want the lump sum, I said without hesitation. Patricia shifted in her chair beside me. Mom, maybe we should consider the annuity. $400,000 a year is substantial, and it protects against overspending. Mrs. Rodriguez looked between us diplomatically. The decision is entirely Mrs. Flores's to make. However, I will say that many winners your age do prefer the security of guaranteed annual payments. I'm 67 years old, I replied firmly. I don't have 30 years to wait for my own money. I want the lump sum. The paperwork took nearly 2 hours to complete. There were tax forms, banking instructions, publicity waivers, and endless signatures required. Mrs. Rodriguez explained that the money would be transferred to my account within 10 business days, and that I should expect significant attention from financial advisors, charities, and long-lost relatives once news of my win became public. We recommend establishing relationships with a financial advisor, an accountant, and an attorney before the money arrives, she said, handing me a list of recommended professionals. Lottery winners often become targets for scams and questionable investment opportunities. As we left the lottery office, Patricia was unusually quiet. I could sense that she was processing something, working through implications and possibilities that she hadn't fully considered before witnessing the official nature of my windfall. $7.2 million, she said finally as we reached her car. That's real money, life-changing money. Yes, it is. What are you going to do with it all? I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised and loved, who was now calculating what my good fortune might mean for her own life. I'm going to live comfortably and independently. I'm going to buy a house that makes me happy. I'm going to travel and experience things I never could afford before. And us? Your family? The question hung in the air between us as Patricia started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. I understood what she was really asking, but I wasn't ready to give her the answer she wanted to hear. You're my family, regardless of money, I said carefully. But money doesn't automatically repair relationships that have been damaged. I know we haven't been perfect, but we love you. Doesn't that count for something? Love has to be demonstrated through actions, not just words. The way you've treated me over the past few months showed me exactly how much my comfort and happiness mattered to you. Patricia drove in silence for several blocks before speaking again. Derek thinks we should all sit down together and discuss how to handle this situation as a family. Handle what situation? Your money. How to make sure you're protected from people who might try to take advantage of you. I almost laughed at the irony. You mean like family members who might try to take advantage of me? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Derek is suddenly very interested in my welfare and my decision-making. Marcus is having actual conversations with me for the first time in months. Everyone is concerned about my protection and my future, but none of you showed that concern when you thought I was just a poor widow living on Social Security. We arrived back at the house to find Derek waiting in the driveway, clearly having arranged his schedule to be available when we returned. He helped me out of the car with exaggerated solicitude and asked detailed questions about the lottery office procedures. Did they explain the tax implications clearly? He asked, following me into the house. Did they provide guidance about investment strategies? Did they warn you about scams and solicitations? They were very thorough, I assured him. Good. Because I've been researching financial advisors who specialize in sudden wealth. I have contacts in the investment community who could provide excellent guidance. That's thoughtful of you. I also think we should discuss security measures. People with significant assets often need to take precautions about their personal safety and privacy. I stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Derek, 3 days ago you couldn't be bothered to participate in a family conversation because you were too busy with work. Now you're researching investment advisors and security measures on my behalf. What changed? He looked genuinely confused by my question. Everything changed. You won the lottery. You have serious money now, serious decisions to make. I'm the same person I was 3 days ago. The only thing that changed is your perception of my value to this family. That's not fair. We've always cared about you. You cared about managing me, about solving what you saw as the problem of my presence in your house. You didn't care about my happiness or my autonomy or my dignity. Derek opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. I could see him processing my words, trying to find a way to reframe the situation that didn't make him and Patricia look like opportunists. Over the following days, the household dynamics continued to shift in ways that would have been comical if they weren't so revealing of my family's true character. Patricia began including me in every decision about meal planning, asking my preferences and opinions as if my input had always been valued. Derek started sharing details about his business and asking for my thoughts on his client relationships. Marcus began emerging from the basement to engage in conversations about current events and my plans for the future. The guest room, which had been urgently needed for Derek's office expansion, suddenly became available again. Patricia suggested I might be more comfortable there while I searched for my own house, and Derek offered to move his business materials back to the basement to accommodate me. You don't need to be cramped in the attic anymore, Patricia said, gesturing around the guest room as if she were showing me a luxury hotel suite. This space is much more appropriate for someone of your new circumstances. My circumstances haven't changed, I pointed out. I'm still the same person with the same health concerns you were worried about last week. But now you have options. You can afford proper care, proper accommodations. I could afford proper accommodations last week too. You just didn't think I deserved them. The phone calls began on December 30th. Derek's business contacts, offering wealth management services. Patricia's friends, suddenly interested in reconnecting after years of minimal contact. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in decades, calling to congratulate me and inquire about my plans. Marcus answered the house phone one afternoon and brought it to me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Something that might have been respect. It's someone called Aunt Florence, he said. Dad's sister from California. She says she wants to talk to you about family business. Florence was Roberto's younger sister, a woman I had liked but rarely spoke to since his death. She had always been practical and direct, and her call was no exception. Blanche, I heard about your lottery win through the family grapevine, she said without preamble. I wanted to call and warn you about what's coming. What do you mean? I mean every relative, every friend, every acquaintance who has your phone number is going to suddenly remember how much they care about you. You're going to get sob stories and investment opportunities and requests for loans. People are going to come out of the woodwork with their hands out. I'm already seeing some of that. It's going to get worse, and it's not just strangers you need to worry about. Family members can be the worst, because they feel entitled to share in your good fortune. I glanced around the living room where Derek was obviously eavesdropping while pretending to read his newspaper. I'm beginning to understand that. Roberto used to worry about this exact situation. He said if you ever came into money, you'd be too generous for your own good. He made me promise to look out for you if anything like this ever happened. What did he suggest? Get your own financial advisor, someone who works for you and not for your family. Don't make any major financial decisions for at least 6 months. And most importantly, don't let guilt or family pressure convince you to give away money before you've had time to think clearly about your own needs. After I hung up, Derek approached with the casual air of someone who had definitely not been listening to my conversation. Everything okay? You looked concerned during that call. Florence was giving me some advice about managing sudden wealth. That's smart. You need good advice. In fact, I've arranged for you to meet with my financial advisor next week. Greg specializes in asset protection and investment strategies for high net worth individuals. I appreciate the offer, but I'll be finding my own financial advisor. Derek looked surprised and somewhat hurt. Greg is excellent. He's helped me build my business portfolio for years. I'm sure he's very competent, but I need someone who works exclusively for me. Someone who doesn't have existing relationships with family members. You don't trust me? The question was loaded with more emotional weight than Derek probably intended. I could see that he genuinely believed his offer to help was altruistic, that he couldn't understand why I would reject assistance from someone who cared about me. I trust you to have your own best interests at heart, I said carefully, just like I'm going to have my own best interests at heart. Those should be the same thing. We're family. Derek, last week you didn't trust me to make decisions about my own dinner timing. Now you want me to trust you with decisions about $7 million. Can you understand why that seems inconsistent? He stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with the logic of my position. I could almost see him working through the cognitive dissonance of wanting to help manage my money, while having recently treated me as someone who couldn't manage her own basic needs. The house hunting began in earnest on January 2nd. I had contacted a real estate agent independently, despite Patricia's offers to help me find someone through her network. Janet Morrison was a woman in her early 60s who specialized in properties for affluent retirees, and she understood immediately what I was looking for. Independence and dignity, she said when I explained my situation. You want a house that makes a statement about your autonomy while providing the comfort and security appropriate for your age. Exactly. We spent the day looking at properties in upscale neighborhoods, places where I could have privacy and space while still being close to good medical care and cultural activities. I was amazed at what $7 million could buy, at the difference between shopping for housing as a poor widow and shopping as a wealthy woman. The third house we visited felt right immediately. It was a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a modern kitchen, and a master suite on the first floor. The yard was landscaped professionally, but not ostentatiously, and the neighborhood was quiet and well-maintained. The owners are motivated sellers, Janet explained as we walked through the spacious rooms. They've already relocated to Florida and want to close quickly. I think we could negotiate a very favorable price. I stood in the living room with its large windows and hardwood floors, imagining myself reading there in the mornings, entertaining guests who wanted to visit rather than people who felt obligated to include me. This could be a home where I was the decision maker, where my preferences mattered, where I could age gracefully on my own terms. I want to make an offer, I said. Janet smiled. Cash offer? Cash offer. When I returned to Patricia's house that evening, the family was waiting in the living room, with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed anxiety. Derek's parents had extended their visit, claiming they wanted to spend more time with family but obviously hoping to witness the developments in my situation. How was the house hunting? Patricia asked with forced cheerfulness. Productive. I made an offer on a house. Already? Don't you want to take your time, look at more options? I found what I want. A 4-bedroom colonial in Westwood Heights. Beautiful property, well-maintained, available for immediate occupancy. Westwood Heights is expensive, Derek observed. I can afford it. But is it practical? That's a big house for one person. The maintenance costs alone will be manageable with my resources. Derek's mother leaned forward with the expression of someone offering valuable wisdom. Dear, you might want to consider something smaller and more sensible. A nice condominium with maintenance services included. At your age, you don't want to be burdened with lawn care and home repairs. I looked around the room at these people who had spent months making decisions about my living situation without consulting me, who were now continuing to question my judgment despite my dramatically changed financial circumstances. I appreciate your concern, I said politely, but I've made my decision. What if you need help? Patricia asked. What if your health gets worse? What if you fall or have an emergency? I'll hire help. I'll install security systems. I'll arrange for whatever care I might need. That's what money is for. But we're your family. We want to be there for you. You had the opportunity to be there for me. You chose to treat me like a burden instead of a family member. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations and hurt feelings. Derek's parents looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they weren't witnessing this family confrontation. The teenagers had disappeared to their rooms, avoiding the adult drama entirely. "Blanche," Derek said finally, "I think you're being unfair. We may not have handled everything perfectly, but we were trying to help you during a difficult time." "You were trying to manage me during what you perceived as your difficult time. There's a difference." "That's not how we saw it." "How you saw it and how I experienced it are two very different things." Patricia's voice was tight with emotion when she spoke. "Are you punishing us? Is this your way of getting back at us for not being perfect?" "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making choices that prioritize my own happiness and independence. If those choices feel like punishment to you, perhaps you should examine why." The offer on the house was accepted the next morning. Janet called while I was having breakfast to report that the sellers had agreed to my terms and were eager to close within 2 weeks. I would be able to move into my new home before the end of January. The news sent ripples of panic through Patricia's household. Suddenly, everyone was concerned about the speed of my transition, the wisdom of my decisions, the potential problems I might face living alone. The same people who had been eager to discuss assisted living facilities just weeks earlier were now arguing that I was rushing into independence too quickly. 2 weeks isn't enough time to arrange proper support services, Patricia argued. You need to interview housekeepers, set up medical monitoring, establish relationships with local doctors. I'll arrange those things after I move. What if something happens in the meantime? Something like what? I'm not an invalid, Patricia. I have a minor heart condition that's well controlled with medication. I'm not helpless or incompetent. But at your age... At my age, I'm old enough to make my own decisions and live with consequences. Derek tried a different approach. What about security? A house that expensive in that neighborhood could attract break-ins or home invasions. You need professional security systems, maybe even a live-in companion for safety. I'll install whatever security measures I think are appropriate. You're being stubborn. I'm being independent. There's a difference. The lottery money arrived in my bank account on January 8th, transforming my financial statement from modest to extraordinary with a single electronic transfer. $7.2 million. More money than I could reasonably spend in my remaining lifetime, enough to guarantee my independence and security for whatever years I had left. The first thing I did was hire my own attorney, a woman named Chen who specialized in estate planning and asset protection for high-net-worth individuals. She was recommended by the lottery office and had no connections to my family or their interests. Mrs. Flores, she said during our initial consultation, lottery winners often face pressure from family members who feel entitled to share in the windfall. It's important to establish clear boundaries and legal protections before making any major financial decisions. That's exactly what I need. I recommend setting up a trust structure that protects your assets while giving you complete control over distributions. We should also discuss estate planning, particularly if you're concerned about family dynamics affecting your inheritance decisions. We spent 2 hours discussing various strategies for protecting my money and my autonomy. Sarah was direct and practical, helping me understand the legal tools available to ensure that my wealth would be distributed according to my wishes, rather than family expectations or pressure. One thing to consider, she said toward the end of our meeting, is that your family's behavior now, while you're living, will likely predict their behavior after you're gone. If they're pressuring you for money now, they'll probably contest your will later, unless you take steps to prevent it. What kind of steps? Clear documentation of your mental competency, detailed explanations of your distribution decisions, and legal structures that make contesting your will expensive and unlikely to succeed. I left Sarah's office feeling more secure than I had in months. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt confident that I could protect both my money and my autonomy from people who might try to manipulate or control me. The family dinner that evening was tense, with unspoken concerns and frustrated expectations. Derek and Patricia kept exchanging glances that suggested they had been discussing strategy for dealing with my sudden independence. Derek's parents were preparing to return to Florida, but their departure seemed reluctant, as if they were worried about missing important developments. "Mom," Patricia said as we cleared the dinner dishes, "Derek and I have been talking, and we think you should consider making some financial provisions for the family before you move out." "What kind of provisions?" "Well, we've been struggling with the mortgage payment since Derek's business slowed down, and Marcus is having trouble finding work. It would mean a lot if you could help us get caught up on some bills." There it was, the request I had been waiting for, the one that revealed what was really driving their sudden concern for my welfare. "How much money do you need?" I asked. Patricia looked relieved that I hadn't rejected the request immediately. "Maybe 50,000? Just to get us back on solid ground financially." "And then what? Another 50,000 in 6 months when you have more bills?" "This would be a one-time thing, just to help us through a rough patch." I studied my daughter's face, seeing the calculation behind her concern, the expectation that my good fortune would automatically become her financial security. "Patricia, last week you were ready to put me in assisted living because you said I couldn't afford to live independently. Now you want me to give you $50,000 to solve your financial problems. That's different. We're family. It's different because now I have money you want. That's not fair, isn't it? Your concern for my welfare increased in direct proportion to your knowledge of my bank balance." Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly having been listening to our conversation. "Blanche, we're not asking for charity. We're asking for family support during a difficult time. Where was the family support when I was sleeping on an air mattress in your attic? That was a temporary situation caused by unusual circumstances. My financial struggles were temporary too, but you didn't offer to help solve them. You offered to manage them by controlling where I lived and how I spent my money." The conversation continued for another hour, with Derek and Patricia alternating between appeals to family loyalty and barely veiled suggestions that I owed them compensation for the months of care they had provided. They seemed genuinely unable to understand why I wouldn't automatically share my windfall with people who had recently treated me so dismissively. Finally, I ended the discussion with a statement that left no room for further negotiation. "I will not be giving anyone in this family money until I see sustained evidence that you value me as a person, rather than as a source of financial support. Your behavior over the past few months showed me exactly how much my happiness and dignity mattered to you. Money doesn't erase that knowledge." "So you're going to punish us forever?" Patricia asked, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm going to protect myself from people who see me as an opportunity rather than as a family member. If that feels like punishment, you might want to examine your own motivations." I went upstairs to continue packing, leaving Derek and Patricia to discuss my unreasonable selfishness and stubborn independence. From the attic, I could hear their voices rising and falling in the urgent tones of people trying to solve a problem that threatened their financial security. Let them worry and plan and strategize. I had my own plans now, plans that prioritized my autonomy and happiness over their convenience and expectations. Tomorrow, I would continue preparing for my move to independence. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that I would soon be free from people who confused love with control and generosity with obligation. Moving day arrived with the crisp clarity of a January morning that promised new beginnings. I had hired professional movers despite Patricia's protests that Derek and Marcus could handle the job, another small assertion of my independence that sent ripples of disapproval through the household. The moving truck pulled into the driveway at 8 o'clock sharp, its presence making my departure suddenly real and irreversible. I stood in the attic one final time, looking around the cramped space that had been my prison and my classroom. Here I had learned the true measure of my family's regard. Here I had discovered the difference between being tolerated and being treasured. Here I had found the strength to reclaim my dignity and my autonomy. The space looked smaller now, diminished by my expanding sense of what was possible for my life. Patricia appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had been crying. The past 2 weeks since our confrontation about money had been strained, filled with stilted conversations and careful politeness that fooled no one. "I brought you coffee," she said, setting the cup down on the windowsill. "I thought you might need it before the movers start bringing everything downstairs." "Thank you." That's thoughtful. We stood there in awkward silence, both of us aware that this represented the end of something that could never be rebuilt in quite the same way. Patricia had lost the illusion that she could control my life, and I had lost the illusion that my family's love was unconditional. "Mom, I need you to know that we never meant to make you feel unwelcome," she said finally. "We thought we were helping you. I understand that's what you thought. Are you ever going to forgive us?" I considered her question carefully. Forgiveness was a complicated concept when the hurt had been so systematic and revealing. I'm not carrying anger, if that's what you're asking. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending things didn't happen. What does it mean then? It means I'm willing to build a new relationship with you based on how you treat me going forward, not on how you treated me in the past. And if we do better, if we show you that we've learned from our mistakes, then we'll have a better relationship. But it has to be genuine, Patricia. It can't be motivated by my money or by guilt about how you handled things before. The movers worked with efficient professionalism, boxing up the belongings I had accumulated during my months in the attic. Most of my furniture and personal items had been in storage since I moved in, waiting for a permanent home that Patricia and Derek had assured me we would find eventually. Now I would retrieve those things and arrange them in a house that belonged entirely to me. Derek helped carry boxes downstairs, his manner subdued and thoughtful. The past 2 weeks had clearly been difficult for him as he processed the reality that I was leaving and taking my newfound wealth with me. His offers to help with the move seemed genuine, though I couldn't help but notice how different his attitude was now compared to when he thought I was just a burden to be managed. "Blanche, I want you to know that you're always welcome here," he said as we watched the movers load my belongings into their truck. "If living alone doesn't work out, if you need help with anything, our door is always open." I appreciate that, Derek. I mean it. We may not have handled everything perfectly, but we care about you, your family. Family is more than just blood relationships, I replied. It's about how people treat each other, especially when it's difficult or inconvenient. He nodded slowly, perhaps beginning to understand the deeper implications of what I was saying. We had the foundation for rebuilding our relationship, but it would require him to see me as an equal rather than as someone who needed management or protection. Marcus emerged from the basement as the last of my boxes were being loaded, squinting in the morning sunlight like a nocturnal creature forced into daylight. His approach toward me had changed dramatically since learning about my lottery win, evolving from indifference to cautious respect to something that might have been genuine affection. "Grandma Blanche, are you really going to live all by yourself in that big house?" he asked. "I am. Are you worried about me?" "Kind of. I mean, what if you fall down the stairs or have a heart attack or something? I'll have security systems and medical alert devices. I'll hire help if I need it. I'll be safer there than I was sleeping on the attic floor." He flinched at the reference to Christmas Eve, his face reddening with what might have been shame. Of all my family members, Marcus seemed to be the one most genuinely affected by the revelation of how poorly they had treated me. "I'm sorry about that night," he said quietly. "I should have said something. I should have offered you my room or the couch or something." "Why didn't you?" "I don't know. I guess I thought it wasn't my place to get involved in adult decisions. And honestly, I was kind of mad that you were living here at all. I thought you were cramping everyone's style." "And now?" "Now I think we were all being selfish jerks, and you handled it better than we deserved." His honesty was refreshing after 2 weeks of carefully worded apologies and defensive justifications from the adults. Marcus might have been immature and self-centered, but he wasn't calculating or manipulative. His regret seemed genuine rather than strategic. "I appreciate your honesty, Marcus. It means more than you probably realize. Are you going to help us with money? Mom and Dad seem really stressed about bills and stuff." "That depends on whether they can show me that they see me as a person worth respecting rather than a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited." "What if I asked, would you help me with college or something?" I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but seeing only the uncertainty of a young man who was beginning to understand that actions have consequences. If you needed help with education or getting started in life, and if you had shown me that you valued our relationship, yes, I would consider helping you. Even after how we treated you? People make mistakes, Marcus. What matters is whether they learn from them and do better. The moving truck pulled away at noon, carrying my possessions toward the house that would become my sanctuary and my statement of independence. I followed in the car I had purchased the previous week, a comfortable sedan that represented another small assertion of my autonomy. Patricia had questioned whether I needed my own vehicle, suggesting that family members could drive me wherever I needed to go, but I had been firm about wanting my own transportation. The Westwood Heights neighborhood felt different as a resident than it had as a visitor. The tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses spoke of stability and prosperity, of people who had the resources to make choices about their lives rather than simply accepting whatever circumstances were imposed upon them. This was where I belonged now, among people who controlled their own destinies. My new house looked even better than I remembered. Its colonial architecture solid and welcoming, its landscaped yard promising seasons of beauty and privacy. The movers were already unloading boxes when I arrived, and the sight of my belongings being carried into my own home filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't expected. Janet Morrison was waiting inside with the final paperwork and the keys. She had arranged for basic utilities to be connected, and had provided contact information for local services I might need. Her efficiency and professionalism stood in stark contrast to the family chaos I was leaving behind. "Congratulations, Mrs. Flores," she said, handing me the keys. "You're officially a homeowner again. How does it feel?" "Like freedom," I answered honestly. The afternoon passed in a blur of directing movers, unpacking essential items, and beginning to arrange my belongings in spaces that were entirely mine to control. The master bedroom on the first floor was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the backyard garden. The living room had a fireplace and built-in bookshelves that would hold the books I had been forced to keep in storage. The kitchen was modern and well-equipped, perfect for cooking meals according to my own preferences and schedule. But it was the little things that mattered most. The thermostat that I could set to whatever temperature I found comfortable. The television that I could watch without worrying about disturbing anyone else's activities. The bathroom that I could use without checking whether someone else needed it first. The refrigerator that I could stock with foods I enjoyed rather than whatever met the family's collective preferences. By evening, I had accomplished enough unpacking to make the house feel lived in rather than just occupied. I ordered dinner from a local restaurant that delivered, choosing exactly what I wanted without consulting anyone else's dietary restrictions or preferences. I ate at my own dining room table, using my own dishes, in complete, peaceful silence. The phone rang while I was washing dishes, and I recognized Patricia's number on the caller ID. For a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity about her state of mind won out. "Mom, how are you settling in?" she asked, her voice carrying forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask underlying anxiety. "Very well. The house is beautiful and the neighborhood is quiet. Are you lonely? It must feel strange being all by yourself after living with family." "It feels peaceful. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed my own company." "We miss you already. The house feels empty without you." I doubted that Derek and Marcus were experiencing much sense of loss, but I kept that observation to myself. "I'm sure you'll adjust. What are you doing for dinner? Are you eating properly?" I ordered Thai food from a local restaurant. It was delicious. "You could have come back here for dinner. You don't have to isolate yourself just because you have your own place now." The word isolate revealed Patricia's continued inability to understand that my desire for independence wasn't about rejecting family, but about reclaiming autonomy. She still saw my choices through the lens of what was convenient or comfortable for her, rather than what was healthy and empowering for me. "I'm not isolating myself," I said calmly. "I'm living independently. There's a difference. When can we come visit? When can we see your new house?" "When I'm ready to have visitors, I'll invite you." The silence that followed suggested she hadn't expected to need an invitation to visit her own mother. The assumption that she could drop by whenever convenient was another example of the boundary issues that had characterized our relationship during my months in her house. "Are you angry with us?" she asked finally. "I'm not angry. I'm protective of my peace and my autonomy." Those sound like the same thing. They're not. Anger is about the past. Protection is about the future. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my new living room, surrounded by the belongings that represented 6 decades of accumulating memories and meaning. The family photographs on the mantle told the story of happier times when my relationships with Patricia and Derek had been based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The books on the shelves represented interests and passions I had been forced to suppress while living as a guest in someone else's house. The comfortable chair by the window was positioned exactly where I wanted it, angled to catch the morning light for reading. This was what freedom looked like. Not just the absence of constraints, but the presence of choices. The ability to structure my days according to my own preferences, to pursue my own interests, to say yes or no to social obligations based on my own desires rather than other people's expectations. The next few weeks fell into a routine that felt both familiar and revolutionary. I woke when my body was ready, rather than when household activities required my participation. I ate meals that appealed to me, rather than accommodating other people's schedules and preferences. I spent my days reading, gardening, exploring my new neighborhood, and gradually connecting with local services and activities. I hired a housekeeper named Maria, who came twice a week to handle the heavy cleaning and maintenance tasks. She was efficient and unobtrusive, someone who helped me maintain my independence, rather than trying to manage my choices. I established relationships with a local physician, a pharmacy that delivered medications, and a grocery store that provided delivery services. These were not signs of helplessness, but evidence of intelligent planning for a comfortable and sustainable lifestyle. The invitations from Patricia began arriving within a week of my move. Dinner invitations, holiday celebrations, family gatherings that always seemed to require my presence, rather than simply welcoming it. Each invitation came with subtle pressure and guilt-inducing language that suggested I was being selfish or antisocial by preferring my own home to their company. I declined most of these invitations, accepting only those that felt genuine rather than manipulative. When I did visit, I made sure to drive myself and to leave when I was ready, rather than staying as long as they expected. These small assertions of control were noticed and occasionally commented upon, but I held firm to my boundaries. "You've changed," Patricia observed during one of these visits. "You're different than you were before." "I'm exactly who I always was," I replied. "You're just seeing me clearly for the first time. You're more assertive, more stubborn. I'm more confident and less accommodating of treatment that doesn't serve my well-being. Is that what money does to people? Makes them selfish? Money doesn't make people selfish. It reveals who they really are by giving them the power to make choices. Some people become more generous when they have resources. Others become more controlling. Some become more independent. Others become more demanding. Which one are you becoming? I'm becoming someone who prioritizes my own happiness and dignity over other people's convenience and expectations." Derek's approach was more subtle but equally persistent. He continued to offer financial advice and investment guidance, always framed as concern for my welfare but obviously motivated by his desire to maintain some degree of influence over my decisions. He brought me articles about scams that targeted wealthy seniors, stories about lottery winners who had lost everything through poor financial planning, warnings about the importance of professional money management. "I'm not trying to control your decisions," he would say. "I just want to make sure you're protected from people who might take advantage of you, like family members who think they deserve a share of my winnings." I asked one afternoon when his warnings about financial predators had become particularly pointed. "That's not what I meant, isn't it? You're warning me about people who might try to separate me from my money while simultaneously trying to influence how I spend it. I'm trying to help you make good decisions. You're trying to make decisions for me, just like you did when I was living in your house. The only difference is that now you have to be more subtle about it because I have the resources to ignore your advice." These conversations were difficult but necessary. Derek needed to understand that his sudden interest in my welfare was transparent and self-serving. I needed to establish that my money was mine to manage according to my own judgment, not according to his recommendations or Patricia's expectations. Marcus's approach was the most honest, and therefore the most appealing. He visited occasionally, usually bearing small gifts or offers to help with tasks around the house. His attention didn't seem calculated or manipulative. and he appeared genuinely interested in my new life, rather than just my new bank balance. "This place is really nice, Grandma Blanche," he said during one visit, wandering through the rooms with obvious appreciation. "It's so quiet and peaceful. I can see why you like living alone. It suits me. Are you happy?" "I mean, really happy, not just saying you are to make us feel bad." "I'm happier than I've been in years. I feel like myself again." "I'm glad. I was worried that we had damaged you permanently or something." His concern seemed genuine, and I found myself softening toward him in ways I couldn't with his parents. Marcus had been thoughtless and self-centered, but he hadn't been deliberately cruel or manipulative. His mistreatment of me had been passive rather than active, neglect rather than exploitation. "You didn't damage me," I assured him. "You taught me something important about the difference between being tolerated and being valued. Are we ever going to have a normal family relationship again? We can have an honest family relationship. I'm not sure we ever had a normal one." "What's the difference?" "Normal implies that everyone pretends everything is fine even when it isn't. Honest means we acknowledge problems and work to address them." "And the money? Is that always going to be weird between us?" "The money is only weird if people treat me differently because of it. If you can see me as the same person I always was, just with more options, then it doesn't have to change anything between us. But it does change things. It changes what you can do, where you can live, how much help you need from other people. It changes my circumstances. It doesn't change my character or my feelings about people I care about. So if I needed help with something, really needed it, you would consider helping me? If you needed help and if you had shown me that you valued our relationship for reasons beyond my ability to provide financial assistance, yes, I would consider it. How do I show you that? By treating me with respect and affection regardless of my financial status. By visiting because you enjoy my company, not because you want something from me. By including me in your life because you value my presence, not because you feel obligated. These conversations with Marcus gave me hope that at least one member of my family might be capable of building a genuine relationship with me based on mutual respect rather than financial calculation or guilty obligation. The first major test came in March, when Derek's business hit a serious financial crisis. One of his largest clients defaulted on their contract, leaving him unable to meet his own obligations and facing the possibility of bankruptcy. The stress affected the entire household, and Patricia called me repeatedly to discuss the situation and its implications for their family's security. "Derek is beside himself," she reported during one of these calls. "He's worked so hard to build this business, and now it could all disappear because of one client who refused to pay their bills. That's very stressful. I'm sorry he's going through such a difficult time. He's been talking about having to sell the house, maybe even declare bankruptcy. The girls would have to change schools. Marcus would have to find somewhere else to live. Those would be significant disruptions. Mom, we need help. I know you're angry with us, but we're family. Surely that means something." There it was. The request I had been expecting since the day I revealed my lottery win. Now that they truly needed money, the pretense of casual conversation was being abandoned in favor of direct appeals to family loyalty and guilt. "How much money do you need?" I asked. $50,000 would cover the immediate debts and give Derek time to find new clients. Maybe $100,000 would provide enough cushion to really stabilize the business. "And you expect me to provide this money because we're family?" "I expect you to help us because we helped you when you needed it. You helped me by allowing me to sleep on the attic floor and treating me like a burden to be managed. That's what you consider equivalent to a $100,000 loan? That's not fair. We gave you a place to live when you couldn't afford your own. You gave me the least desirable space in your house and made me feel unwelcome in every other room. You solved your own problem of what to do with me, not my problem of where to live comfortably. So you're going to let Derek lose his business out of spite? I'm going to make financial decisions based on what I think is wise and appropriate, not based on family pressure or emotional manipulation. What would it take? What would we have to do to earn your help?" The question revealed that Patricia still didn't understand the fundamental issue between us. She was thinking in terms of earning money rather than rebuilding relationship, calculating what actions might unlock my financial assistance, rather than examining what changes might restore mutual respect and affection. You can't earn money from me, I said clearly. You can only earn trust and respect. Money follows naturally from healthy relationships built on genuine care and mutual regard. I don't understand what you want from us. I want you to see me as a complete person with my own needs, preferences, and dignity. I want you to include me in your lives because you value my presence, not because you need my help. I want you to treat me as an equal rather than as someone who needs to be managed or protected. And if we do that, you'll help us with Derek's business? If you do that consistently over time and demonstrate that your regard for me isn't motivated by my money, I might choose to help with various things. But help given under pressure isn't really help at all. It's extortion disguised as family obligation. I ended the call feeling both sad and resolved. Sad that my family couldn't seem to understand the difference between genuine relationship and financial transaction. Resolved to maintain my boundaries regardless of the emotional pressure they continued to apply. Derek called later that evening, his voice tight with stress and barely controlled desperation. His approach was more businesslike than Patricia's emotional appeals, but the underlying request was identical. Blanche, I need to speak with you directly about my situation, he said. I think Patricia may have misrepresented what I'm asking for. What are you asking for? A business loan. Not a gift, not charity, but a legitimate loan with interest and a formal repayment schedule. I have a solid business plan for recovery, established client relationships, and a track record of success. This is just a temporary cash flow problem caused by one client's bad faith. What are your terms? $100,000 at 5% interest, repayable over 3 years with quarterly payments. I'll provide full financial documentation and quarterly reports on business performance. His proposal was professional and reasonable, the kind of arrangement that might make sense between business associates or family members with healthy relationships. But it was also a test of whether I could be manipulated through appeals to logic rather than emotion. Derek, 3 months ago you didn't trust me to make decisions about what time I ate dinner. Now you want me to trust you with a $100,000 business loan. My business judgment has nothing to do with our family relationship, doesn't it? You made judgments about my competence and autonomy based on my financial status. Now you're asking me to ignore your judgment about my competence and autonomy because you need my financial resources. I never questioned your competence. You questioned everything about my judgment and decision-making ability. You treated me like someone who couldn't be trusted to manage her own basic needs. That was different. You were dealing with health issues and grief. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control me. The only difference now is that you need something from me. So you're suddenly willing to treat me as an equal. So you won't help? You'll let my business fail to teach me a lesson about respect? I'll make decisions about loans and investments based on whether I think they're wise, not based on family pressure or guilt. If you want to be considered for a loan, you'll need to demonstrate over time that you see me as a person worthy of respect, rather than as a resource to be managed or exploited. How long is this going to take? My business can't wait for you to work through your hurt feelings. My hurt feelings, as you call them, are actually clear observations about how you treat people when you think they can't fight back. Those observations affect my judgment about your character, and therefore my willingness to trust you with significant amounts of money. Derek's financial crisis eventually resolved itself through other means. He found new clients, negotiated payment plans with creditors, and managed to avoid bankruptcy through a combination of hard work and careful management. His success without my help seemed to surprise him, as if he had forgotten that he was capable of solving problems without controlling other people. The experience clarified something important for all of us. Derek and Patricia learned that I couldn't be pressured or manipulated into making financial decisions based on family guilt. I learned that I could maintain my boundaries even when the consequences seemed harsh or unfair to others. More importantly, the crisis revealed the difference between family members who had learned from our previous conflicts and those who were simply waiting for opportunities to resume old patterns. Marcus continued to visit regularly, never mentioning money or asking for assistance, seemingly content to rebuild our relationship on its own merits. Derek and Patricia's interactions with me remained strained and calculating, focused on what they could get rather than what they could give. By summer, I had settled into a life that felt both comfortable and meaningful. I had joined a book club at the local library, volunteered with a literacy program for immigrant families, and begun taking art classes at the community center. These activities connected me with people who knew me as Blanche rather than as a lottery winner, people who valued my contributions rather than my bank balance. I traveled more than I ever had before, taking trips to places Roberto and I had dreamed of visiting but never could afford. I saw Europe in the spring, took a cruise through the Mediterranean, spent a week in Tuscany learning to cook traditional Italian dishes. These experiences felt like gifts I was giving to my younger self, the woman who had spent decades sacrificing her own desires for family obligations and financial limitations. The house became a true home, filled with beautiful things that brought me joy rather than practical items chosen for durability and economy. I bought art that spoke to me, furniture that was comfortable rather than sensible, books that interested me rather than ones I thought I should read. Every purchase was a small act of self-determination, a choice made according to my own preferences rather than other people's expectations. Patricia's visits became less frequent and more strained, as it became clear that I wouldn't be returning to my previous role as accommodating family member. She seemed to struggle with my transformation from dependent mother to independent woman, unable to adjust her expectations or her behavior to match my new circumstances. "You're not the same person you used to be," she complained during one visit. "You used to be so easygoing and flexible. Now you're rigid and selfish." "I used to accommodate other people's preferences at the expense of my own happiness," I corrected. "Now I make choices that prioritize my well-being and peace of mind." "That's what I mean. You've become selfish." "I've become self-preserving." "There's a difference." "What happened to putting family first?" "I learned that family should be mutual. Everyone should matter, not just the people with the loudest voices or the most pressing needs." "So you'll never help us, no matter what happens?" "I'll help family members who treat me with genuine respect and affection. I won't help people who see me as an obligation or an opportunity." "How do we prove that we see you differently?" "By actually seeing me differently, not by performing behaviors you think will unlock my bank account." The conversation ended without resolution, as most of our conversations did now. Patricia couldn't seem to understand that her approach to rebuilding our relationship was fundamentally flawed. She was still thinking in terms of earning access to my money rather than genuinely changing how she viewed and treated me. Derek's interactions with me evolved into a kind of cautious politeness, professional courtesy extended to someone whose goodwill might be useful in the future. He no longer offered unsolicited advice about my life or my finances, but he also didn't include me in family activities or seek out my company for its own sake. Only Marcus seemed capable of building a genuine relationship with the new version of me. His visits became regular weekly events, often involving shared meals or activities, rather than just obligatory check-ins. He told me about his job search, his social life, his thoughts about the future, treating me as a trusted confidant rather than a potential source of funding. "I like who you've become," he told me one afternoon as we worked together in my garden. "You're happier than you were before, and stronger too." "I'm the same person I always was. I just have the resources now to live according to my own values rather than other people's expectations." "Do you think Mom and Dad will ever figure it out?" "Figure what out?" "That you're not trying to punish them, you're just trying to protect yourself." "I hope so, but people can only see what they're ready to see." "Are you lonely? Living all by yourself, I mean?" "I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from people you care about. Being alone is having the space to think and feel and choose without constantly accommodating other people's needs." "I think I understand that. Sometimes when I'm with Mom and Dad, I feel lonelier than when I'm by myself." "That's because they're not really seeing you as you are. They're seeing their version of who they think you should be." "Is that what they were doing to you?" "They were seeing their version of what they thought an aging widow should be. Helpless, grateful, accommodating, manageable. They never saw me as I actually was." As autumn approached, I reflected on the year that had transformed my life completely. 12 months earlier, I had been sleeping on an air mattress in an attic, dependent on my family's grudging hospitality, and treated as a burden to be managed. Now I lived in my own beautiful house, surrounded by things that brought me joy, connected to activities and people that enriched my life rather than depleting it. The lottery money had been the catalyst for change, but the real transformation had been internal. I had rediscovered my own worth, reclaimed my dignity, and learned to prioritize my own happiness without guilt or apology. I had stopped waiting for other people to treat me well and started demanding it as a basic requirement for relationship. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being loved and being needed. My family had needed me when they thought I was helpless and dependent. They had loved the version of me that accommodated their preferences and solved their problems, but they had struggled to love the version of me that made independent choices and maintained personal boundaries. The phone rang on a crisp October evening, and I recognized the number as Patricia's. I answered with the mild curiosity that had replaced my former anxiety about her calls. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice carrying a note I hadn't heard before. "Derek and I have been talking, really talking, about everything that happened this year." "What did you conclude?" "We concluded that we were terrible to you, not just on Christmas Eve, but for months before that. We treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved." "What brought you to that realization?" "Derek's business crisis, actually. When we needed help and you said no, I was angry at first. I thought you were being vindictive and cruel, but then I started thinking about how we had treated you when you needed help. And we never actually helped you, did we? We managed you. We made decisions for you. We treated you like a child or an invalid instead of recognizing that you just needed temporary support during a difficult transition." "That's a fair assessment. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really genuinely sorry, not because I want money from you, but because I love you and I failed you when you needed me most." "I appreciate that, Patricia. Is there any way we can start over? Can we rebuild our relationship on better terms?" "We can try, but it has to be genuine and it has to be consistent. I won't go backward to being treated as less than equal." "I understand. I think I finally understand." "What do you understand?" "That you don't need us anymore, but you're willing to want us if we show you that we're worth wanting." It was the most insightful thing Patricia had said all year, and it gave me hope that perhaps she truly was beginning to see our relationship more clearly. "That's exactly right," I told her. "I don't need you to take care of me or manage my life. But I would like to enjoy your company and include you in mine, if we can find a way to do that with mutual respect. Can we try? Can we start with small steps and see if we can do better?" "We can try." The conversation ended with tentative plans for Patricia to visit the following week, not to discuss money or problems, but simply to spend time together and see if we could find our way back to genuine affection and respect. As I hung up the phone and looked around my beautiful living room, filled with books and art and comfortable furniture that I had chosen according to my own preferences, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this place. The lottery money had given me options, but the real prize had been discovering my own strength and worth. I was Blanche Flores, and I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to let them treat you badly. Sometimes the most generous gift you can give is the opportunity for people to examine their own behavior and choose to do better. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new choices, new opportunities to live according to my own values and preferences. Tonight I would sit in my own chair, in my own house, surrounded by my own things, and enjoy the profound satisfaction of a life reclaimed and a dignity restored. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner for the first time since Roberto's death. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was choosing to host the same holiday that had once represented my lowest point, when I had been relegated to sleeping on the attic floor, while others enjoyed the comfort and warmth of family celebration. But this Thanksgiving would be different, organized according to my preferences, and including only people who had earned their place at my table. The guest list was small but meaningful. Marcus would be joining me, along with his new girlfriend Sarah, a nursing student who treated him with the kind of respect that suggested she came from a family that understood healthy relationships. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had become a close friend over the past year, and she would be bringing her famous dumplings and stories from her recent trip to visit family in Taiwan. Janet Morrison, my real estate agent who had become a genuine friend, would arrive with her husband and their twin granddaughters who were visiting from college. Patricia and Derek had been invited, but their acceptance had come with conditions I had established after months of carefully rebuilding our relationship. They could attend if they came as grateful guests rather than expectant family members. They could participate if they contributed to the meal preparation and cleanup, rather than simply being served. Most importantly, they could join the celebration if they could manage an entire day without mentioning money, investments, or their ongoing financial concerns. The past year had been a masterclass in maintaining boundaries, while leaving room for growth and redemption. Patricia had made genuine progress in learning to see me as an autonomous adult, rather than a problem to be managed. She had started calling simply to chat about her day, or to ask my opinion on decisions she was making, treating me as a trusted advisor, rather than someone who needed protection from her own choices. She had begun visiting without agenda, content to spend time together without constantly assessing my needs or capabilities. Derek's evolution had been slower and more reluctant, but noticeable nonetheless. He had stopped offering unsolicited financial advice, and had begun asking my opinions on matters unrelated to money management. When his business had finally stabilized and begun to prosper again, he had made a point of thanking me for forcing him to find his own solutions rather than becoming dependent on my resources. The gratitude had seemed genuine, though I suspected it was easier to appreciate my boundaries now that he no longer needed what I wasn't willing to give. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, and I opened it to find Marcus and Sarah standing on my front porch with flowers and a bottle of wine. Sarah was a petite woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, and she had won my approval during their previous visits by treating me as Marcus's grandmother rather than as a wealthy woman who might provide opportunities for advancement. "Grandma Blanche, this place smells incredible," Marcus said, kissing my cheek as they entered. "What can we do to help?" "You can set the table while Sarah and I finish the side dishes. The good china is in the dining room cabinet." I watched Marcus navigate my kitchen with the confidence of someone who had spent many afternoons here over the past year, learning to cook family recipes and sharing stories about his job search and eventual employment with a local marketing firm. His transformation from sullen basement dweller to engaged young adult had been remarkable to witness, and I took some pride in knowing that my refusal to enable his previous behavior had contributed to his growth. Sarah proved to be an excellent kitchen companion, efficient and unobtrusive, asking intelligent questions about cooking techniques and family history. She had grown up in a household where multiple generations lived together harmoniously, and she understood the delicate balance required to maintain respect across age differences. "Marcus tells me you've been helping him learn to manage his finances," she said as we worked together on the sweet potato casserole. "That's such a valuable gift. I've been teaching him that financial independence requires discipline and planning, not just good luck," I replied. "Money can disappear as quickly as it arrives if you don't understand how to protect and grow it. Are you worried about people trying to take advantage of your lottery win?" I was initially, but I've learned that the people most likely to take advantage of me were the ones closest to me. Strangers want my money, but they don't have the emotional leverage to make me feel guilty about protecting it. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Family relationships can be complicated when money is involved. All relationships are complicated when one person has significantly more resources than another. The key is maintaining mutual respect, despite the imbalance. Mrs. Chen arrived shortly after 3, carrying a covered dish, and wearing the elegant silk blouse she reserved for special occasions. At 73, she was 6 years older than me, but possessed an energy and curiosity that made her seem decades younger. She had become my closest friend over the past year, someone who understood the challenges of aging independently while maintaining dignity and purpose. "Blanche, this house always looks so beautiful," she said, surveying the dining room where Marcus had arranged my best china and crystal according to my detailed instructions. "You have created such a warm and welcoming home." "It feels good to entertain again," I admitted. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed having people in my space by choice rather than obligation. Choice makes all the difference in hospitality. When you invite people because you want them, rather than because you must have them, everyone feels the difference. Janet and her family arrived as we were putting the finishing touches on the meal. Her granddaughters were bright, articulate young women studying engineering and pre-med. and they brought an energy to the gathering that reminded me of family celebrations from decades past, when the future seemed full of unlimited possibilities. Mrs. Flores, Marcus was telling us about your art classes, one of the girls said as we gathered around the dining room table. He showed us pictures of your paintings. They're amazing. Thank you. I never had time to pursue creative interests when I was younger, but now I have the luxury of exploring things that bring me joy rather than just things that need to be done. What's your favorite thing about living alone? The other granddaughter asked with the directness of youth. I considered the question seriously. The quiet. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of other people's emotional needs and expectations. When you live with family, especially as you get older, there's constant pressure to prove that you're managing well, that you're not becoming a burden. Living alone, I can simply be myself without performance or justification. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes, but loneliness and solitude are different experiences. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from people you care about. Solitude is having the space to connect with yourself and to choose your social interactions based on genuine desire rather than obligation. Patricia and Derek arrived as we were serving the main course, carrying flowers and a bottle of expensive wine that suggested they were still trying to impress me, rather than simply joining the celebration. But their behavior throughout the afternoon was notably different from previous family gatherings. Patricia helped serve the meal without taking over the kitchen. Derek engaged in conversations about topics unrelated to business or money. Both of them seemed to be making genuine efforts to participate as guests, rather than to manage the event according to their preferences. The conversation around the table was lively and wide-ranging, touching on politics, travel, career aspirations, and family memories. I found myself relaxing into the role of hostess in ways I hadn't been able to do in years, enjoying the pleasure of bringing together people I cared about, rather than managing the stress of accommodating people whose presence felt obligatory. Blanche, this meal is extraordinary, Janet's husband said as we finished the main course. You've created something really special here. Thank you. It feels good to celebrate in my own space with people who choose to be here. Is this the first Thanksgiving you've hosted since your husband died? Mrs. Chen asked gently. The first one I've hosted anywhere since Roberto died. Last year I was sleeping on an air mattress in an attic, grateful for whatever accommodation I was offered. The silence that followed was brief but significant. Patricia looked down at her plate, her face flushing with what I hoped was shame, rather than irritation, at having our family's difficulties discussed in front of others. A lot can change in a year, Derek said quietly. Everything can change in a year if you're willing to make difficult choices and stick with them, I replied. As we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Marcus pulled me aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious, more mature than I had seen him look before. Grandma Blanche, I need to tell you something, he said. Sarah and I are talking about getting engaged. That's wonderful news. She seems like a lovely young woman. I wanted to ask you about something, though. I know you said you'd consider helping family members who had earned your respect, and I think I've been trying to do that this year. You have been. Your behavior and attitude have changed completely. Sarah and I have been saving for a wedding and a down payment on a house, but it's going to take us years to accumulate enough money. I was wondering if you might consider helping us. Not as a gift, but as a loan with a formal repayment plan. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or entitlement, but seeing only the uncertainty of a young man who was trying to build a life while maintaining his integrity. How much money are you talking about? Maybe $25,000 for a wedding and another $25,000 for a house down payment. We could pay you back over 5 years at whatever interest rate you think is fair. Why do you think you've earned my help? Because I've spent this year trying to show you that I value our relationship for itself, not for what I can get from it. I've visited you regularly, helped with projects around your house, included you in my life decisions, and tried to treat you with the respect you deserve. And if I said no to the loan, how would that affect our relationship? It wouldn't change anything. I'd be disappointed, but I'd understand. I'd keep visiting and I'd keep working toward our goals. We'd just take longer to achieve them. His answer satisfied me that his request was coming from a place of hope, rather than expectation, relationship, rather than entitlement. This was exactly the kind of situation I had envisioned when I told my family that money would follow naturally from healthy relationships built on genuine care and mutual regard. I'll consider it, I told him. I'll want to see your budget and your savings plan, and I'll want Sarah to be part of the conversation since this affects her future as well. Of course. Thank you for even considering it. Marcus, you've earned consideration by showing me consistent respect and affection over time. This is how family relationships should work. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Patricia lingered to help with the cleanup. We worked together in comfortable silence, a dramatic change from the tense interactions that had characterized our relationship for most of the past year. Mom, can I ask you something? She said as we finished loading the dishwasher. Of course. Do you think you'll ever forgive us completely? Will there ever be a time when you can look at Derek and me without remembering how badly we treated you? I considered her question carefully. Forgiveness was a complex process, not a simple decision that could be made once and forgotten. I think forgiveness is ongoing rather than final, I said. I forgive you each time you demonstrate that you've learned from your mistakes. I forgive you each time you treat me with genuine respect, rather than calculated politeness. I forgive you each time you include me in your lives because you want me there, rather than because you feel obligated. And the money? Will you ever help us financially? I might, if circumstances warrant it, and if I believe your request is motivated by genuine need, rather than opportunistic greed. But financial help will never be automatic or expected. It will always be my choice based on my assessment of the situation and our relationship at the time. That seems fair. It seems honest. And honesty is the foundation of any healthy relationship, family or otherwise. After everyone had left and I had finished cleaning up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room reflecting on the day. The Thanksgiving I had hosted was everything the previous year's celebration had not been. It had been warm without being stifling, inclusive without being obligatory, generous without being exploitative. Most importantly, it had been mine. I had controlled every aspect of the event, from the guest list to the menu to the conversation topics. I had been the decision maker, rather than someone whose preferences were considered only after everyone else's needs had been met. The contrast with the previous year felt almost surreal. 12 months ago, I had been treated as a burden whose presence required accommodation and management. Tonight, I had been treated as a beloved hostess, whose company was sought and valued. The difference wasn't just in my financial circumstances, though those had certainly provided options I hadn't possessed before. The real difference was in my willingness to demand respect as a condition of relationship. Over the following weeks, I worked with Marcus and Sarah to develop a formal loan agreement for their wedding and house down payment. We met with my attorney to ensure that the arrangement was properly documented and legally binding, protecting all parties and establishing clear expectations for repayment. The process was educational for all of us. Marcus and Sarah learned about the responsibilities that come with borrowing significant amounts of money. I learned about their financial management skills and their commitment to building a stable life together. Most importantly, we all learned that money could be part of family relationships without corrupting them, provided that everyone approached the arrangement with honesty and respect. I want you to understand that this loan represents my confidence in your character and your future, I told them as we signed the paperwork. I'm not just investing in your wedding and your house. I'm investing in your integrity and your relationship. We won't let you down, Sarah promised, and I believed her. The wedding took place the following spring in a small ceremony that perfectly reflected the couple's values and budget. It was elegant without being extravagant, personal without being exclusive, celebratory without being wasteful. I was honored to be included not just as a guest but as a valued family member whose presence added to the joy of the occasion. Patricia and Derek attended the wedding as well, and their behavior continued to demonstrate the progress they had made in learning to see me as an equal rather than a dependent. They included me in family photographs, consulted me about gift choices, and treated me as someone whose opinions and preferences mattered. You look beautiful today, Mom, Patricia said as we watched Marcus and Sarah exchange vows, happy and confident and strong. I feel all of those things. I'm glad. I'm sorry it took us so long to see you clearly. People can only see what they're ready to see. You see me clearly now, and that's what matters. As summer approached, I began making plans for my second major trip since winning the lottery. This time, I would be visiting Australia and New Zealand, places Roberto and I had dreamed of seeing but never imagined we could afford to visit. The trip would last 3 weeks and would include tours of major cities, wine regions, and natural landmarks. I was looking forward to the adventure, but I was equally looking forward to returning home to the life I had built for myself. My house had become a true sanctuary, my relationships had been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect, and my days were filled with activities that brought me joy rather than obligations that depleted my energy. The lottery money had given me options, but the real treasure had been discovering my own worth and learning to insist that others recognize it as well. I had transformed from a marginalized family member sleeping on someone else's floor to a confident woman living exactly as she chose. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to let them treat you badly, and that sometimes the most generous gift you can give is the opportunity for people to examine their own behavior and choose to do better. Most importantly, I had learned that wealth isn't just about money. True wealth is having the power to make choices that align with your values, the wisdom to distinguish between people who love you and people who need you, and the courage to prioritize your own dignity and happiness without guilt or apology. I was Blanche Flores, and I had spent the last year of my life proving that it's never too late to start over, never too late to demand better, and never too late to discover that you're worth more than you ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.